Good evening to those bored enough to watch. In a previous video, I talked about the second Uncharted game and how I thought out of the trilogy, it was the best. However, Uncharted 3 is still a great game that I want to talk about as it does so much right worth talking about. When I first played these three games, I was in the midst of my mock exams and simply wanted a way to take off my mind of the gradually intensifying school year, something still doing as such to this day. One can argue I probably should have had my priorities straight and focused on studying rather than gaming. After all, it was November and I could have waited until the holidays to sit down and play it, and yes, you have a point, I won't argue with it, but look, I may have gotten a grade 6 in my physics mock exam, but I did get to watch an old woman suffocate, so who's the real winner here? Jokes aside, I want to talk about Uncharted 3 and the beauty embedded within it, ranging from everything I liked and disliked and why ultimately I would recommend it. So, with that said, let's discuss Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. The game begins with Nathan and Sully walking through the streets of London and into a bar, where they meet a man by the name of Talbot, whom is willing to part with a large sum of money in exchange for Francis Drake's ring. During a small conversation with Sully, Nathan notices that the money being offered to them is fake, and when the two attempt to leave, they're ambushed by everyone in the bar. This leads to a proper brawl in the bar where the player is introduced to the melee combat in the game, in which is something I'll discuss in due course. For now, after fighting through everyone in the bar, they're cornered outside by them and eventually introduced as Charlie Cutter, of whom keeps Nathan and Sully on the ground while a car arrives. From within emerges an old woman named Marlowe and Talbot. The former addresses Nathan and his constant desire for adventure before taking the ring for herself. In trying to get it back, Charlie shoots both Nathan and Sully against the wishes of Marlowe, of whom drives off in anger. So, as the two lay there, we cut to a flashback section of 20 years prior in Colombia, where a much younger Nathan Drake is present here attending an exhibit of Francis Drake and his many finds. I really liked the opening of this game. While being action-packed, it serves for a good introduction to the villains of this game and alludes to what the main story of this game is about. Unlike previous games where the main antagonist wasn't introduced into the game until much later, this game immediately establishes who the main characters will be going up against, which allows for them to stand out more in the player's mind in my opinion. Additionally, this introduction also seeks to supposedly introduce one of the core themes of this game, pride and desire for adventure. With that aside, Nathan eventually finds Drake's ring in one of the exhibits, and while he's taking note of something, he finds a younger Sully, of whom is discreetly watching from afar. He moves away and watches Sully from a distance. As he opens the lock to the glass case and as Nathan tries to get to it, he's caught by one of the guards and thrown out. After following Sully through the streets, he finds him and a replicator making a copy of the keys he used for the case in the exhibit. After watching Sully place it in his wallet, Nathan eventually follows him, and as he's spending time with a much younger Marlowe, he snatches his wallet. Just as he thinks he got away, Sully corners him at the street, and it's here that the two are introduced to one another. Sully recognizes the potential in Nathan and gets the wallet back from him. Later that evening, it's seen that Nathan managed to get the key out of the wallet prior to giving it back to Sully, and so he infiltrates the now tourist-free exhibition to take both the ring and the Cipher disc within. Eventually, Marlowe, her men, and Sully arrive to take the Cipher disc from Nathan, but not the ring, in which as Sully stops Marlowe from slapping Nathan, he runs away as her men chase after him. This sees the player be introduced to a chase section of the game, in which I thought that they were really well thought out and action-packed sections of the game. I enjoyed the sense of speed and tension evoked from these segments, as it seeks to make these past segments of the game more memorable in my opinion. After Nathan finds himself cornered, he's saved by Sully, in which we then watch the two introduce themselves to one another and explain what it is they're after. Nathan explains that he suspects that Francis Drake had hidden something during a voyage he was sent on by Queen Elizabeth, in which he believes it could be treasure. Of course, like with all of these games, it's never that simple, but we'll see that in due course. So, with that, after Sully expresses that he recognizes the potential in Nathan and that he wants to take him under his wing, the two mark the beginning of their bond that will last for decades. We cut back to the present, in which Nathan and Sully awake and reveal that their entire brawl inside the bar was just a ruse for them to be able to follow Marlowe and Talbot back to their hideout undetected, and so they begin making their way there. In the previous game, Sully had taken a step back during the plot of the game, in which in this game he's back to being a main part of the story. I really like how this game seeks to expand and develop upon the relationship and bond he has with Nathan, as seen by showing how the two met through these flashback sections of the game, and why Sully is choosing to involve himself in this operation as opposed to bowing out like he did in the previous game. For 20 years, himself and Nathan had been at stalemate with Marlowe, and it's now that they finally intend to obtain their checkmate. There is a historical element as to why he's here, and I really appreciate that the game takes the time to establish that and justify it, regardless of it being something that not many would question in the first place. After meeting with Chloe, who shows them the building that they went into, the four of them infiltrate and make their way to the hideout hidden inside what appears to be a normal building on the outside. When they finally find their way inside, they listen in as Marlo realizes that the ring she took from Nathan earlier was a fake when she tries to put it on the Cipher disk. And from there, herself and Talbot realizes that they've been followed. When the room is empty, Nathan, Cutter, and Sully place the ring into the Cipher disk, which reveals an anagram, in which after finding what it's hiding, Nathan discovers that Francis went to Arabia. So, with that clue in mind, the trio fight their way outside of this area and back to Chloe. It's here that I want to discuss the combat. While the improvement isn't as revolutionary as it was between the first and second game, I still think that everything that the second game did well is carried over to here. Additionally, issues that were carried over from the first to second game have also been fixed. For example, during my playthrough, the game was mistakenly snapping me towards less among a multitude of other improvements. Furthermore, the melee combat has also seen a few additions, primarily in the form of being incentivized to use it more through a new enemy type. Throughout the game, you may run into these brutes which deal heavy damage if they were to hit you, in which, to avoid this, you're to dodge and attack accordingly until you eventually take them down. Overall, I think that the combat in this game is just as good as it was in the second game, expanded somewhat and improved, which makes it all the more fun to play within this game. I think that throughout the trilogy, this is one of the best iterations of the combat we've seen yet, and I really enjoyed my time with it. With that aside, Nathan, Sully, Chloe, and Cutter all talk in their hideout about what they found. Francis Drake went on an expedition to find the Atlantis of the Sands on behalf of the Queen and a man named John Dee, one of her closest advisors. Chloe's concerned about the fact that whatever he had found, Francis went to great lengths to hide it from even the people he was sent by, in which, recalling the events of the previous game, the last time they searched for a lost city, things gradually went more and more downhill. Nathan claims that things are different, as unlike the previous game, they have the advantages they know where to look and Marlo doesn't, in which he notes that the two places that they'll be looking is in France and in Syria. So, as they agree to think about how they'll traverse the desert later, they all mark their union in finding the lost city. Nathan and Sully soon find themselves in France, in which, during the midst of their travels, they find that Talbot and his men are also here, deducing that the duo must have been followed to this area. After fighting through them, they find a secret passage hidden beneath the altar in which they deduce to be John Dee's laboratory. They eventually find one half of an amulet, which Nathan takes note of before being ambushed by Talbot and his men, of whom take their findings and leave them to deal with the spiders that are repelled by their torchlight. Though, as a result of their light quickly dying out, the two rush out of the area away from them. When the two decide to leave France as they no longer have a reason to be there, Talbot's men set the building ablaze in hopes of killing Nathan and Sully to the burning fire inside. This leads to an action segment where Nathan and Sully make extensive efforts to make their way out of this crumbling building, ultimately culminating into them running away from the crumbling roof and onto the ground below. This action segment of the game is certainly a brilliant one, as it is action-packed and adrenaline pumping, allowing the player to feel immersed and captivated somewhat early into the game, which, in my opinion, garners their interest as they would want to see what the game does next. When the two reach the ground, Sully lectures Nathan about pride and letting it cloud his judgment in terms of having a reason to see this search through. Sully promises to stay with him during this venture, but warns him to leave his pride out of the search. I'll come back to this later, so for now, Nathan comes to the realization that there is a high likelihood that Cutter and Chloe were followed too, so they find themselves in Syria. After traversing through the area and taking down Marlo's patrolling men, they find Chloe and Cutter. The latter remembers that he needs to top up his phone. After all, those contracts are a scam, which, you know, he's not wrong. But with that aside, Cutter shares his newfound knowledge. Elizabeth's spy network were all a part of some kind of secret society that sought to use fear and deception to control their enemies. This is the same group that Marlo is the descendant of, explaining why she's keen on finding the lost city. Cutter also shares a clue he found, in which they all deduce that they need to reach the highest point of the building they're currently in to find where it leads to. Atop the roof, they're tasked with finding the North Star, which will lead them to the hidden entrance to find the second half of the amulet taken from Nathan and Sully earlier. While looking for it, however, they're attacked by Marlo's men. During their attempted escape, Nathan and Cutter are separated from Chloe and Sully, in which when they go to the castle, they're led to their next clue. After looking through the telescope, they find the pillars which they suspect to be their hidden entrance, though once again they're ambushed. After thwarting the attack, they decide to inspect the pillars to see if they can deduce what about them will trigger their access to the secret entrance. During their search, Cutter is drugged by Talbot, who reveals himself to have been following them, in which, in his drugged state, Charlie hands Talbot the journal he had been documenting his findings in, and as Nathan and the rest of the group see him, it's already too late. Talbot disappears, in which leaves the rest of them to find the secret entrance. When they eventually do, Nathan stays behind to help Charlie traverse through this tight area. Cutter isn't too fond of tight spaces, and in the midst of his fear he begins attacking Nathan. After Sully points a gun at him and Chloe brings him back to his senses, they continue to traverse through the area. When they find the other half of the amulet, they know where to go in Yemen for their next clue. However, it appears they've been followed, so after blowing their way out of the area, they find themselves in a confrontation with Talbot. Charlie points his gun at them, which forces them to drop their guns. Regardless of their surrender, Talbot commands him to shoot, in which he gladly does so. At the the man who commanded him. With this distraction, the four of them begin running for the exit as fast as they can, though three of them jump onto the loose bridge which collapses when Nathan lands on it, so that leaves Cutter to be cornered by Talbot, who forcefully takes the other half of the amulet. Marlowe arrives and sets fire to the surrounding area, leaving Cutter no choice but to jump. When he lands, he breaks his leg, which leaves Sully to carry him whilst Nathan and Chloe clear the area of Talbot's men. One slightly funny occurrence that happened during this section of the game for me was that it actually soft-locked on me during this section here. We are supposed to open the door with the aid of Chloe. Since Cutter and Sully were in the way, she couldn't get into position. Thankfully, this was at a checkpoint, which means I didn't have to go through the fight to get there again, but it was slightly funny to see. With that aside, they board a bus, and despite Chloe trying to talk Nathan out of seeing this quest through, he ultimately listens to Cutter, who enforces that he shouldn't let them win, not after all the trouble in Syria. So, when the matter of how they'll get to Yemen comes into question, Sully knows just who to call. The two meet with Elena in Yemen, who managed to get them in there in the quickest amount of time possible, in which it appears as there is some history between Nathan and Elena since the events of the previous game. The two appear to have gotten engaged or married, though supposedly due to Nathan's desire for adventure, a strain was placed upon their relationship which caused them to separate. Elena is still wearing her engagement ring, and as for Nathan, well, he's wearing a ring, but the only engagement it links him with is his obsession for adventure, which Elena brings into question and expresses her worries, though not for Nathan but more rather for Sully. She reasons that Sully would do anything on Nathan's behalf, and as true as that may be, she discourages Nathan from asking him to do so. During their venture through the city, they spot Talbot, whom was pointed in the same direction as them as he had gotten both parts of the amulet during both his ambushes. Nathan follows him and recovers Cutter's notebook, but in doing so he's ambushed and forced to fight his men in the streets. Sully and Elena arrive, in which they all run into hiding, coincidentally in the very place they came here to find. While Sully leaves momentarily to get a gun, Elena once again questions Nathan in his venture, and when Elena denies loving the adventure as much as Nathan does, she's asked why she doesn't walk away, in which she refuses to do so. Sully eventually returns and they all enter the well. It's here that I want to talk about the puzzle sections of the game and how throughout what we've seen thus far in the trilogy, this game has one of the weakest iterations of them we've seen. In my opinion, they get more and more worse as the game goes on. For example, in France, where we need to solve this puzzle on the wall with very little hints on where to arrange the pieces, I think that if this puzzle wasn't in the game, it would be no different, and if anything, it would have been much better if the game had tried to find an alternative method for getting through this section of the game as opposed to making me do a puzzle. Additionally, another example could be in this very chapter where the game forces the player to do 3 puzzles in direct succession to one another. This slows the game's pace to a crawl in what was otherwise a very fast-paced story. Of course, I'd have no issues with the game slowing down, but accomplishing this through puzzle after puzzle just makes it feel artificial. This game is action-packed, as seen through the set pieces we've experienced thus far and the many more to come. It really does feel as though the game was running out of places to put these puzzles and just shoves them all down your throat in this section of the game. Thankfully, the puzzle sections are lessened from here, so with that aside, they find an order which points to where they need to go in the desert through a celestial map. Nathan asks Sully to remember this as he used to be in the Navy, as he recommends against copying it down as their notebooks always seem to be getting robbed by unforeseen ambushes. Elena points towards a mural which depicts faces screaming or crying, though any chance of further interpretation is robbed from them by the spiders from earlier, as the trio begin fleeing from the vicinity. When they're safe from the spiders, Elena questions why Nathan wants to continue going on this adventure if Francis was distraught and discouraged from traveling any further by what he found in this area, and why he can't rest with the fact that he knows where to find what Marlowe and Talbot are looking for while they don't. When they get out of there, they're attacked by Talbot and his men, in which Nathan eventually finds himself drugged by the man himself and tripping through the streets of Yemen. He awakes in front of Marlowe, who reveals that she took Nathan's ring and wants to find Sully, as currently he's the only one who knows where to find the Atlantis of the Sands. Marlowe begins trying to plant the seeds of doubt in Nathan's mind about Sully and his loyalty, though to no avail. Eventually Talbot mentions that Sully has been located, and as he begins trying to get away, Nathan begins giving chase. This leads to a chase section which eventually culminates into Nathan and Talbot fighting each other, and just as the latter is knocked down, the former is knocked out by a third party. Nathan is eventually awoken by a man named Ramses, who wants to know where the Atlantis of the Sands is located. Seeing as how Sully is the only one who knows, Nathan doesn't know, though Ramses doesn't believe him. He threatens to torture Sully for the information instead, which sees Nathan fight his way to the abandoned boat which he suspects where they're keeping Sully. In my opinion, this section of the game felt unnecessary, as you could basically remove it from the game entirely and it would make no difference to the story. It really does feel as though the game is trying to waste as much time as it can possibly muster before moving on to the next action section of the game, which in my opinion makes this section more monotonous to play through, especially on repeat playthroughs. Another reason I think that this section of the game felt unnecessary is due to the fact that when you do find Sully, it eventually is discovered that Ramses was bluffing and doesn't actually have him captive. Furthermore, as Nathan escapes the sinking boat, Ramses dies in the midst of such a thing, in which while I appreciate another well-made action section of the game, it really does come into question whether this was necessary for moving the plot forward. forward. Ramses has no plot relevance from here onwards or much in the story in general. It feels like he, alongside the entirety of this area, was created for the sole purpose of wasting time. With that aside, Nathan eventually makes his way back to Elena, with whom outlines a plan for them to get on a plane which will somehow lead them to Sully, with whom actually has been kidnapped by Talbot and his men. It'll be a while before that time strikes for them to get on that plane, so for now, Nathan and Elena get a moment's rest, not before he looks at the ring on her finger and apologizes. This is where I want to talk about a key theme of this game: obsession and desire for adventure. This is a story about how Nathan has an unquenchable thirst for his adventures, one that can never be satisfied, as after each one, the only thing he can think about is the next. This also factors in with other elements such as pride, as outlined by Sully after escaping the burning building in France. Nathan does have his pride intermixed with this adventure, blocking out the voices of reason such as Elena and Chloe, and only listening to people such as Cutter, who encourage him to keep going. This constant pursuit for adventure is something that the other characters simply can't uphold or maintain, as others such as Elena and especially Sully in his older age simply want to settle down, being unable to continually undergo such physically daunting adventures. Of course, this is something that is revisited in Uncharted 4, but for this game I think that the writing is really well done. It's subtle, yet enough hinting is provided for the player to pick up on the key themes. That desire for adventure will eventually get them killed, and throughout the course of this game, Nathan realizes that he has nothing to prove and that his pride has gotten the better of him, as well as the fact that these adventures can put his loved ones such as Sully and Elena in hazard of harm. This is something that Nathan also realizes during his trip with Elena to get to the plane, deciding to go alone as he doesn't want to risk losing her again, much like he did at the end of the second game. With that though, he boards the plane. After enough time has passed, he decides to leave the landing gear, though he's attacked by a brute who opens the plane to send him out, but Nathan ends up sending not only the brute and himself, but the whole plane down as well. This leads into one of the best sections of the game, one where Nathan is left to traverse the desert in hopes of somehow miraculously finding Sully, though such a thing ends to no avail. He eventually finds an abandoned village, and during his quest for water, he's instead ambushed by Talbot's men. After fighting through them and nearly being overwhelmed, a group of people on horseback arrive, and when Nathan begs their leader not to shoot him, they allow him to ride with them on their horses. When they get back to their hideout, the man introduces himself as Salim. Nathan explains that they have Sully hostage and that they're trying to find the Atlantis of the Sands. Salim mentions that they can't allow Marlowe to find it, and so agrees to help Nathan not only get Sully back, but also thwart Talbot and his men. In this game's finale, Nathan joins Salim as they ride and fight the many men that are holding Sully captive, and when we eventually get to him, the two reunite, and it's here that Sully mentions that whatever Marlowe is after isn't treasure and that they need to be stopped. So they all ride into a sandstorm, and during the midst of it, Salim is separated from Nathan and Sully. They enter the gateway to the Atlantis of the Sands, and after opening this comically large door, they find themselves within. They find a fountain of water and Nathan drinks it, in which they then see a solar eclipse. As they're looking at it, Sully is shot and seemingly killed by Marlowe and Talbot, in which causes Nathan to fight through his men, of whom turn into fiery skulls after being killed. The following chase scene culminates into Nathan running into Sully once again, who snaps him out of the fever dream he's been having after drinking the water. There was never a solar eclipse, and Sully was never shot, and from this the two deduced that the water contained something hallucinogenic which caused Nathan's outburst. This is what Marlowe and Talbot are after, and it's what Francis Drake had been sent by the Queen to retrieve. They were never after treasure, but more rather they wanted power, something they could control their enemies with. Only when Francis realized their true motive, he lied to the Queen and told her he never found anything. Drake's deception is what stopped the Queen from turning into a juggernaut through controlling her enemies with fear. So Nathan and Sully take the steps to stop Marlowe and Talbot for good. The duo find them trying to fish something out of the water, and as Talbot tries to shoot Nathan, he's stopped by Sully, who's then overpowered and kicked into the water. This causes Nathan to jump in there, rescue Sully, and shoot not only whatever it is they were trying to get from within the water, but also the surrounding buildings above too. This causes the entire city to begin falling apart, and during their escape, Nathan and Sully find Marlowe and Talbot, though before anything can happen, the ground beneath them begins to crumble. Nathan's attempts at trying to save Marlowe are useless, as she dies regardless, and with her sinks Francis Drake's ring. With the building continually crumbling, they continue to flee. Eventually, Nathan is ambushed by Talbot, and so the two fight on the crumbling ground. Sully eventually arrives, and just as he's about to be killed by Talbot, Nathan shoots him and sends him down towards the sand pit and ruins below. And with the threat gone, Nathan and Sully continue running out of the area, eventually to be greeted by Salim as they all ride away from the crumbling city. We cut to some time later. Sully gives a speech about his own upbringing and how over time he grew to view Nathan as a son, revealing that he'd been holding on to Nathan's engagement ring when he thought the entire time he had lost it, and so he puts it back on and shows Elena, as the three walk off and board a plane back to their home, thus ending Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. Much like the previous game, there isn't a lot you can do after beating this game. You can replay the game on the harder difficulties for those interested, or you can view the statistics or treasures you collected throughout the game. It isn't a lot, but it is enough to keep you busy for at least the next few hours after beating the game. With that, I want to conclude things. Overall, I really liked Uncharted 3. It has its issues with things like pacing and unnecessarily elongating its story, but overall I thought it was a culmination of everything that was amazing about the first two Uncharted games, including a great finale that sought to end Nathan's story. Of course, this wouldn't be the end, as there is still Uncharted 4 that seeks to put an end to it. With this game alongside the trilogy, it ends are amazing games, and I can't recommend them more. If you're looking for a great game filled with action, adventure, and story, then Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception is for you. So, there's the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. This video has been in the works for quite some time now, so I hope it was worth the wait. If you want to view the list of games I want to make videos about in the future, then you can always do so through the link in the description. Additionally, if you want to follow me, then you can always do so through the link in the description, as well as any afterthoughts or messages I may want to add. With that, I haven't really got much else I want to say, so I'll see you all in my next video. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.